In the spring of 1885, Abigail Fletcher boarded a westbound train in Philadelphia with nothing but a single trunk, a well-worn journal, and courage that blazed brighter than the bonfire that had consumed her family home 3 years prior. At 28, with hands that bore the calluses of survival rather than embroidery needlework, society had already written her off as unsuitable for marriage. But Abigail refused to accept their judgment. What awaited her in Riverdale, Montana, wasn't the secure future she had gambled everything on. It was humiliation that would have crushed a weaker spirit. Yet, life has a curious way of leading us, not to where we want to go, but to where we're meant to be. This is the story of how a woman condemned for being too fierce discovered that her strength wasn't a flaw, but a gift. One recognized by a man who knew the true value of resilience. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The last light of April was fading when Abigail closed her trunk in the tiny attic room she'd called home since the fire. 3 years of working as a manager at her uncle's hardware store had taught her more about axes and nails than most men knew, but it had also shown her the limits of her future in Philadelphia. No matter how efficiently she ran the inventory or managed the accounts, she remained poor Abigail Fletcher, the unmarried niece who spoke too directly and knew too much about a man's world. "Are you certain about this, Abigail?" her Aunt Martha asked from the doorway, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. "Montana territory is practically wilderness. The winters alone are no worse than the winter I spent in that hunting." "Cabin after the fire," Abigail replied, securing the brass lock on her trunk. "I survived 3 days alone in February before the search party found me. I believe I can manage Montana." Her aunt sighed, recognizing the determined set of Abigail's jaw. "At least Mr. Patterson sounds respectable in his letters. A cattle ranch. Owner with 100 acres needs a practical wife." Abigail nodded, though she didn't mention the other letters she'd received and declined before accepting Daniel Patterson's proposal. Men seeking delicate, compliant wives to grace their frontier homes. Women who would shrink from hardship rather than face it head-on. Daniel's letters had been different. Straightforward, honest about the challenges of ranch life, seeking a partner rather than an ornament. His last letter confirmed everything, Abigail said, retrieving the well-read page from her pocket. "The ranch house has 4 rooms. He employs 3 hands during calving season, and the nearest town has both a general store and a doctor. He's offering security and respect." What she didn't say was that Daniel Patterson was her last, best hope. At 28, with no dowry and a reputation for being headstrong, her prospects in Philadelphia had withered to nothing. The whispers had begun, even before the fire that took her parents. Murmurs about how the Fletcher girl was too outspoken, too knowledgeable about business matters, too willing to state her opinions. The fire had only hardened those qualities. In her, surviving alone in the woods had burned away any pretense of delicacy, leaving a core of pragmatic strength that Philadelphia society found distinctly unladylike. "I've arranged for Walter to take you to the station tomorrow," Aunt Martha said, referring to her son who had inherited the hardware store. "The train leaves at 9. "Thank you," Abigail replied, genuine gratitude in her voice, despite the tension that had always existed between her and her cousin. Walter had never forgiven her for understanding the business better than he did. That night, Abigail added one final entry to her journal, April 18th, 1885. "Tomorrow I leave for Montana to marry a man I've never met. Some might call this desperation. Perhaps it is, but I prefer to think of it as practicality. Daniel Patterson needs a wife who understands hard work and doesn't fear it. I need a place where my capabilities are assets rather than flaws. We have made an arrangement that serves us both. If respect can grow into affection over time, so much the better. but I will not pretend to be less than I am, even for the security of marriage. Those days are behind me. The journey west was arduous. 4 days of rattling train cars, uncomfortable benches, and brief stops at stations where Abigail stretched her legs and purchased whatever simple food was available. She'd travelled little in her life, having only gone as far as Boston once with her father on a buying trip for the store. The endless plains of the Midwest gave way to rolling hills and finally the distant silhouettes of mountains as the train pushed. West Abigail spent the hours watching the changing landscape and reading the small collection of books she'd brought, a volume on basic veterinary care, a manual on household management in frontier conditions, and a dog-eared copy of Emerson's essays that had belonged to her father. Practical knowledge and philosophical courage, the twin pillars she'd built her life around since the fire. Fellow passengers occasionally attempted conversation, their curiosity piqued by a woman traveling alone to Montana. Abigail answered politely but briefly, unwilling to explain her circumstances to strangers. One older woman, sizing up Abigail's plain traveling dress and solitary state, had asked directly if she was going west as a mail-order bride. "I'm going to join my fiancé," Abigail had replied evenly. "He runs a cattle ranch outside Riverdale." "Brave girl," the woman had commented, or foolish. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. By the time the conductor called out, "Riverdale Station, Riverdale, Montana Territory," Abigail had rehearsed the moment a dozen times in her mind. She knew what Daniel Patterson would look like from his description. Tall, broad-shouldered, with brown hair and a beard kept neat enough for Sundays. He'd promised to meet her train and take her directly to the ranch, where they would be married by the circuit preacher the following day. Abigail checked her appearance one last time, in the small hand mirror from her reticule. Her chestnut hair was neatly arranged in a practical bun, her face clean and composed, despite the fatigue of travel. She'd never been a conventional beauty, but her features were strong and balanced. Hazel eyes that her father had once called too observant for your own good, a straight nose, and a mouth more accustomed to directness than simpers. Riverdale Station, all out for Riverdale. The conductor called again as the train began to slow. Abigail gathered her belongings, squaring her shoulders as she prepared to step off the train and into her new life. The platform was modest compared to Philadelphia's Grand Terminal. Just a wooden structure with a small station house and a handful of people waiting for the twice-weekly train. Her eyes scanned the small crowd, looking for a man who might match Daniel's description. Among the waiting figures, one stood apart, taller than the others, with the solid build of someone accustomed to physical labor. As Abigail descended from the train, her carpetbag in one hand, he stepped forward. "Miss Fletcher?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "Mr. Patterson?" Abigail responded, extending her hand formally. He removed his hat, revealing hair that was indeed brown as described, though threaded with more grey than his letters had mentioned. "Welcome to Riverdale." There was an awkward moment as they regarded each other, measuring the reality against whatever expectations they had formed. Daniel Patterson appeared to be in his late 30s, with a weather-beaten face that spoke of years under the Montana sun. His eyes were a clear blue, his expression cautious as he took in Abigail's appearance. And in that first assessment, Abigail saw something flash across his features that she recognized all too well. Disappointment, quickly masked. Her heart sank, but her posture remained straight. "Your journey was comfortable, I hope?" he asked, his tone polite but reserved. "As comfortable as one might expect," Abigail replied, maintaining her dignity despite the familiar sinking feeling. Another man who had expected something different from her letters. Perhaps someone more delicate, more visibly feminine, despite her honest descriptions of herself. "It's quite a distance to travel," Daniel nodded, then signaled to a boy nearby. "Jimmy will take your trunk to my wagon. We should get you settled before dark." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The ride to Daniel Patterson's ranch was largely silent, broken only by his occasional comments about landmarks they passed or facts about Riverdale. The town itself was smaller than Abigail had imagined from his letters. In a single main street with a general store, post office, small church, and a handful of other buildings. Beyond the town stretched vast grasslands, dotted with pine trees that grew denser toward the mountains looming in the distance. "How many head of cattle do you currently manage?" Abigail asked, trying to bridge the uncomfortable silence with practical conversation. Daniel glanced at her, seeming surprised by the question. 63 at present, looking to expand to 100 by next spring if the winter's mild. And your ranch hands, they live on the property? 2 cabins behind the main house, he replied. Mike Sullivan's been with me 5 years. Jackson Tate joined last spring. We hire extra help during calving season. Abigail nodded, making mental calculations about provisions and household management. I'll need to know your arrangements. For supplies, do you purchase monthly from town or Miss Fletcher? Daniel interrupted, his knuckles whitening slightly on the reins. Perhaps we should discuss domestic matters after you've had a chance to rest from your journey. She fell silent, recognizing the rebuke. Too direct, too practical, the same criticisms she'd faced in Philadelphia, but she'd thought a Montana rancher would appreciate straightforwardness. Her unease deepened as the wagon turned onto a rutted path that led toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. Pine Creek Ranch was modest compared to the expansive operations Abigail had read about in dime novels, but impressive nonetheless. For a man who, according to his letters, had built it from nothing over 10 years. The main house was a sturdy 2-story structure with a covered porch. Nearby stood a large barn, several corrals, and the 2 smaller cabins Daniel had mentioned. As they approached, a dog came bounding out to meet them. A black and white border collie that barked once in greeting before racing circles around the wagon. "That's Meg," Daniel said, the first hint of warmth entering his voice. "Best cattle dog in the territory." The wagon came to a halt before the house, and Daniel helped Abigail down with formal courtesy. Before they could reach the porch, the front door opened and an older woman emerged, drying her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Winters," Daniel called. "This is Miss Fletcher from Philadelphia." "Welcome to Pine Creek, Miss Fletcher," Mrs. Winters said, her weathered face creasing in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've prepared the spare room for you." "Spare room?" Abigail questioned, looking to Daniel. He cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze. "I thought it best you have separate accommodations until the wedding. Mrs. Winters lives in town but comes out 3 days a week to help with cooking and household matters. She'll be staying in the house tonight as well." The implications were clear. He was ensuring propriety but also creating distance. This wasn't the arrival Abigail had expected based on their correspondence. "Very considerate," she replied evenly, though disappointment tightened her chest. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters." The inside of the house was simply furnished but well maintained. A large kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a dining area with a pine table that could seat 8, and a sitting room with several bookshelves that immediately caught Abigail's attention. The spare room upstairs was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the corrals. "Supper's at 6, Mrs. Winters informed her. "I've heated water if you'd like to wash up." Left alone, Abigail sank onto the bed, the exhaustion of travel finally catching up with her. Something had changed between her final letter and her arrival. Daniel's initial reaction to her appearance hadn't been overtly negative. She wasn't unattractive, merely ordinary. But there had been something in his manner that suggested disappointment or reluctance. Perhaps he'd expected someone more, traditionally feminine despite her candid descriptions. Or maybe he'd received information about her that had caused second thoughts. Whatever the reason, The man who greeted her was far more reserved than the straightforward, practical rancher who had written those letters. After washing away the grime of travel and changing into a fresh dress, Abigail made her way downstairs. Voices from the kitchen stopped abruptly as she entered. Daniel and Mrs. Winters breaking off what appeared to be an intense conversation. "Miss Fletcher," Daniel said, rising from his chair, "I hope you found the room comfortable." "Perfectly. Adequate, thank you," she replied, taking the seat he indicated at the table. Supper was a strained affair. Mrs. Winters served a hearty meal of beef stew, cornbread, and stewed apples, but conversation was minimal. Daniel asked polite questions about her journey, while Abigail inquired about local conditions and ranch operations. Neither ventured into more personal territory. As Mrs. Winters cleared the plates, Daniel finally addressed the subject they'd been avoiding. "Miss Fletcher, there's a matter we should discuss before tomorrow." Abigail set down her cup, meeting his gaze directly. "I've sensed since my arrival that something has changed. If you've reconsidered your proposal, I would prefer honesty." Daniel had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It's not that simple. Your letters described a woman of practical mind and capable nature, which is what a ranch needs." "But," Abigail prompted when he paused, "but I received a letter last week from a Mr. Walter Fletcher, who identified himself as your cousin." Ice formed in Abigail's stomach. "Walter wrote to you? What did he say?" Daniel's expression grew troubled. "He felt obligated to warn me that while you are indeed skilled with figures and management, you possess a forceful nature unsuited to a harmonious household. He mentioned incidents of confrontation with customers, disregard for his authority. As your employer and—" He hesitated. "And?" Abigail pressed, anger beginning to replace her shock. "And that you survived a fire through methods that demonstrated an unfeminine and disturbing fierceness that might make you unsuitable as a wife." The words hung in the air between them. Abigail's hands clenched in her lap, but her voice remained steady. "My cousin never forgave me for understanding my father's business better than he did. As for the fire, I survived by doing what was necessary, breaking a window with a chair when the stairs burned, fashioning rope from bedsheets, and later hunting small game to feed myself until help arrived." Her eyes held Daniel's. "If that makes me too fierce for your household, I should know now." Daniel rose from the table and moved to the window, staring out at the darkening ranch yard. "Riverdale is a small community, Miss Fletcher. People talk. A man in my position needs to maintain certain standards." "And I would damage those standards," Abigail stated flatly. "You must understand," Daniel continued, turning back to face her. "I've worked for 10 years to build this ranch and my standing in the community. The right kind of wife can enhance that standing. A woman known for being confrontational might have the opposite effect." Abigail stood slowly, dignity straightening, her spine despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "Mr. Patterson, let me be perfectly clear. I have never been confrontational without cause. I speak directly because life has taught me the folly of pretense. I survived that fire and its aftermath through determination, not delicacy, and I make no apologies for it." Daniel's expression hardened. "And this is precisely the manner that concerns me. A wife should bring peace to a home, not challenge." "A wife should bring truth," Abigail countered. "But I see we have fundamentally different expectations of marriage." "Indeed," Daniel agreed, his tone cooling further. "I believe we would not suit after all. I'll arrange for your return passage to Philadelphia and provide accommodation at the Riverdale Hotel until transportation can be secured." "Keep your money," Abigail said, maintaining her composure through sheer willpower. "I'd rather find my own way than accept charity from a man who values reputation above character." She turned and climbed the stairs to her room, closing the door before allowing her carefully constructed facade to crumble. Tears of anger, not sorrow, burned in her eyes as she paced the small space. Walter's interference wasn't surprising. He'd never approved of her leaving Philadelphia, but she hadn't anticipated such a vindictive action. Now she found herself stranded in a remote Montana town with limited funds and no prospects. The journey back to Philadelphia was not merely a matter of pride. It represented returning to a life she'd deliberately left behind, admitting defeat to Walter and others who had deemed her too fierce for marriage. As she stared out the window at the vast Montana night, Abigail made a decision. She had survived worse than rejection. Tomorrow she would go into Riverdale and find work, any work, until she could determine her next steps. She had not traveled thousands of miles only to retreat at the first obstacle. What she didn't know was that 20 miles away, on a struggling ranch named Broken Wheel, a man with his own history of judgment and rejection was about to hear of Daniel Patterson's mail-order bride, the woman deemed too fierce for Pine Creek Ranch. Dawn broke, clear and cold over Pine Creek Ranch. Abigail had slept little, spending most of the night planning her next steps. She dressed in her sturdiest traveling outfit, a dark blue skirt of durable wool, a crisp white shirtwaist, and a fitted jacket that her aunt had considered alarmingly mannish, but Abigail found practical. If she was to seek employment in Riverdale, she needed to appear capable rather than desperate. She packed her belongings methodically, leaving out only what she would need for a night or two at whatever lodging she could secure in town. The rest would remain in her trunk until her situation stabilized. When she descended to the kitchen, she found Mrs. Winters preparing breakfast alone. "Mr. Patterson rode out at first light," the housekeeper informed her without preamble. "Said to tell you he'd return mid-morning to take you to town. There's a stagecoach that connects with the eastbound train in Helena every Thursday." "I see," Abigail replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the pot warming on the stove. "And what does Riverdale offer in terms of employment for women, Mrs. Winters?" The older woman's eyebrows rose. "Employment? I thought you'd be returning east." "My plans have changed," Abigail stated simply. "I've traveled too far to retreat at the first disappointment." Mrs. Winters studied her for a moment, reassessing. "Riverdale's a small place. The hotel sometimes needs help with laundry. The general store takes on extra hands during busy seasons, though I doubt Mr. Patterson would appreciate you remaining in the area." "Mr. Patterson's comfort is no longer my concern," Abigail replied, spreading jam on a slice of Mrs. Winters' freshly baked bread. "Though I understand options may be limited here, is there a larger settlement nearby?" "Granite Falls is 30 miles north," Mrs. Winters said reluctantly. "More businesses there, including a dress shop that might hire a seamstress. But traveling alone—" "I survived 4 days on a westbound train," Abigail interrupted. "I imagine I can manage 30 miles if transportation can be arranged." Mrs. Winters huffed, but there was a glint of something that might have been approval in her expression. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you?" "Determined," Abigail corrected. "There's a difference." By the time Daniel Patterson returned to the house, Abigail was seated on the porch, her carpetbag beside her and her resolve firmly in place. He approached with visible discomfort, his normally confident posture stiff with awkwardness. "Miss Fletcher," he began, removing his hat, "I've arranged for a room at the Riverdale Hotel. Mrs. Barlow, the proprietor, is a respectable widow who keeps a clean establishment." "Thank you," Abigail replied politely. "Though I should inform you I don't plan to return east immediately. I intend to seek employment in the area while I consider my options." Daniel's expression darkened. "That would be most irregular. A woman in your situation?" "My situation is that I am unmarried, employable, and in need of work," Abigail stated firmly. "Nothing irregular about that in 1885. "Riverdale is a small community," Daniel said, echoing his words from the previous evening. "Your presence would inevitably lead to gossip that might reflect poorly on both of us." Abigail stood, meeting his gaze directly. "Mr. Patterson, your concern for appearances is noted. However, I didn't travel 2,000 miles to have my movements dictated by a man who has rejected me based on hearsay. I will conduct myself with perfect propriety, but I will not leave until I'm ready." The ride to town passed in tense silence. Daniel secured Abigail's trunk at the livery stable for temporary storage, then escorted her to the Riverdale Hotel. A 2-story clapboard building with a small porch and a sign promising clean rooms and good meals. Mrs. Barlow was a brisk woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She assessed Abigail quickly, her gaze lingering on the carpet bag. "Thought you were bringing home a bride, Daniel," she remarked, making no effort to lower her. A voice, despite the presence of 2 men conversing by the small lobby fireplace. "There's been a change of plans," Daniel replied stiffly. "Miss Fletcher will need accommodations while arranging her return journey." "I'll need the room for at least a week," Abigail interjected. "Possibly longer." Mrs. Barlow's eyebrows rose at this contradiction. "A week costs $3 in advance." Abigail counted out the money from her dwindling funds, painfully aware that her resources would not sustain her for long. "I'll also be seeking employment while I'm here. Would you know of any positions available in Riverdale?" Daniel stiffened beside her, but Abigail ignored him. Mrs. Barlow's shrewd eyes moved between them, clearly intrigued by the tension. "Can't say I do offhand," she replied. "Though Mason at the general store sometimes needs help with inventory." She handed Abigail a key. "Room 4, top of the stairs on the right. Breakfast is included, served from 6 to 8. Daniel cleared his throat. "If you'll excuse me, Miss Fletcher, I have business to attend to." His relief at escaping the awkward situation was palpable. Abigail watched him stride away, his back rigid with discomfort, and felt a strange mix of anger and pity. What a limited life, she thought, to be so governed by others' opinions. "Well," Mrs. Barlow said once Daniel had left, "I've known Daniel Patterson 10 years, and I've never seen him so rattled. Must be quite a story there." "A simple misunderstanding about expectations," Abigail replied diplomatically. "Now, about employment opportunities. Is Mr. Mason often at his store? I thought I might inquire this afternoon." "He'll be there till 5, Mrs. Barlow confirmed, "though I should warn you, Riverdale likes its privacy. Folks might be curious about why Daniel's mail-order bride isn't at Pine Creek." "I'm sure they will be," Abigail agreed, "but I've weathered gossip before." Her room was small but clean, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a small wardrobe, and a window overlooking Riverdale's dusty main street. Abigail unpacked only what she needed for the night, then washed her face and hands before heading out to explore the town. Riverdale consisted of one main street with a handful of businesses: the general store, a small bank, a combined barber shop and bathhouse, a saloon that advertised fine spirits and fair prices, and a cafe attached to the hotel. Side streets held modest homes, and at the north end stood the white-painted church Daniel had pointed out during their arrival. The general store was her first stop. A bell jingled as she entered, announcing her presence to the grey-haired man, arranging bolts of fabric on a shelf. "Afternoon," he greeted without turning. "Be with you in a moment." "Take your time," Abigail replied, using the opportunity to survey the store. It was well stocked for a frontier establishment, tools and hardware on one side, foodstuffs and household goods on the other, with clothing, fabric and personal items displayed in glass cases near the center. The organization was haphazard, however, with no apparent system to the arrangement of goods. The man turned, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. "Don't believe we've met. Martin Mason, proprietor." He extended a weathered hand. "Abigail Fletcher," she replied, shaking it firmly. "Recently arrived from Philadelphia." Recognition flashed in his eyes. "Ah, you'd be Patterson's—" He stopped, reconsidering his words. "You're new to Riverdale?" "I am," Abigail acknowledged, seeing no point in pretense. "And I'm seeking employment while I decide my next steps. Mrs. Barlow suggested you sometimes need assistance with inventory." Martin studied her with undisguised curiosity. "Word travels fast in Riverdale." "I imagine it does," Abigail agreed. "I have experience managing a hardware store in Philadelphia. I'm familiar with inventory systems, ordering and accounts." "A hardware store?" Martin repeated, surprise evident. "That's unusual work for a lady." "It was my father's business," Abigail explained. "After his death, I helped my cousin run it for 3 years." Martin scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Could use help with the spring inventory, truth be told. Getting behind on the ledgers, too." He gestured to the cluttered counter, where several books lay open amidst scattered invoices. "But folks might talk if I hire Patterson's former intended, Abigail corrected firmly. "And people will talk regardless. The question is whether you need competent help with your business." A small smile tugged at the corner of Martin's mouth. "Direct, aren't you?" "I find it saves time," Abigail replied. 2 days' trial, Martin decided abruptly. 50 cents a day. If you're as good with figures as you claim, we'll discuss something more permanent." Abigail resisted the urge to show her relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "When would you like me to begin?" "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, Martin said. "Wear something that can handle dust. Back storeroom's in desperate need of organizing." As Abigail left the general store, a sense of accomplishment warmed her despite the uncertainty of her situation. She had secured lodging and employment within hours of arriving in Riverdale. Not permanent solutions, but enough to buy time while she considered her options. She was so absorbed in planning her next steps that she nearly collided with a man, rounding the corner at a brisk pace. Strong hands steadied her, preventing the impact. "Pardon me, ma'am," a deep voice apologized. "Wasn't watching where I was going." Abigail looked up into the most startling pair of green eyes she'd ever seen, set in a face that might have been handsome once, before life had carved deep lines around the mouth and left a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. "No harm done," Abigail replied, stepping back from the stranger's steadying grip. Up close, she noticed more details. The scar was old, the lines around his eyes as much from squinting into the sun as from hardship. And though his clothes were worn, they were meticulously clean. "You're new to town," he observed, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who didn't use it often. "Is it that obvious?" Abigail asked. The corner of his mouth quirked upward, not quite a smile. "Riverdale has exactly 312 residents. I know them all." "Then you have the advantage of me, Mr. Mercer." "Noah Mercer." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture more habit than formality. "Broken Wheel Ranch, north of town." The name triggered a memory from her conversation with Mrs. Winters. Broken Wheel was struggling, she'd mentioned. Something about a series of misfortunes. "Abigail Fletcher," she offered in return, "recently arrived from Philadelphia." Recognition flashed in his eyes, quickly masked. "Welcome to Riverdale, Miss Fletcher, if you'll excuse me." He nodded politely and continued past her toward the general store, his stride purposeful. Abigail watched him go, noting the subtle limp in his right leg and the way other townspeople subtly shifted aside as he passed. Not fear, she decided, but a peculiar form of deference tinged with wariness. By evening, Abigail had toured the entirety of Riverdale, familiarizing herself with its layout and observing its rhythms. She ate a simple dinner in the hotels attached. Café, aware of curious glances from other diners. News of her situation had clearly spread. Small towns thrived on such fodder, but she held her head high, meeting each inquisitive look with calm dignity. She was finishing her apple pie when Mrs. Barlow approached her table. "You've caused quite a stir for one day in town," the hotel proprietor remarked, sliding into the chair opposite Abigail. "Securing employment at Mason's, conversing with Noah Mercer on the street. People are talking." "People always talk," Abigail replied, taking a sip of tea. "I find it best to give them something worthwhile to discuss." Mrs. Barlow chuckled, a dry sound like autumn leaves rustling. "You're not what Daniel Patterson expected, that's certain." "So it seems," Abigail agreed. "May I ask you something, Mrs. Barlow? You mentioned Mr. Mercer's name with a certain emphasis. There seems to be a story there." The older woman studied her for a moment, weighing her response. "Noah Mercer came to Riverdale 8 years ago, bought the old Jenkins place when nobody else would touch it. Land was considered cursed after 3 owners failed there." "Cursed?" Abigail repeated skeptically. "Bad water rights, poor soil in parts, and terrible luck," Mrs. Barlow clarified. "Noah renamed it Broken Wheel after the accident." "What accident?" "Wagon crash 3 years back. His wife and son were returning from town when the wheel broke on a steep section of road. Wagon went over the edge." Mrs. Barlow's voice dropped. "Rebecca died instantly. The boy, Samuel, survived but lost his hearing. Noah's leg was crushed trying to reach them." Abigail's chest tightened at the tragedy. "And the limp never healed right," Mrs. Barlow confirmed. "Dr. Thompson said he'd walk with that limp rest of his life. Would have lost the ranch then, but Noah worked twice as hard, doing the labor of 2 men despite the pain. Folks here respect that, even if they find him difficult." "Difficult how?" "Keeps to himself mostly. Direct to the point of bluntness. Won't accept charity or sympathy, which Riverdale loves to offer both." Mrs. Barlow's shrewd eyes assessed Abigail. "Reminds me a bit of you, actually." Before Abigail could respond to this observation, the cafe door opened and Daniel Patterson entered with another man. Both glanced around the room, their gazes landing on Abigail with visible surprise. "That's Sheriff Taylor with him," Mrs. Barlow murmured. "Interesting." Daniel approached their table, his expression stiff with discomfort. "Miss Fletcher, I didn't expect to find you dining out this evening." The hotel cafe seemed a practical choice, Abigail replied evenly. "Good evening, Mr. Patterson." "And to you, sir," she added, acknowledging the sheriff. "Tom Taylor, ma'am." The sheriff introduced himself, tipping his hat. "Town sheriff and postmaster. Welcome to Riverdale." "Thank you," Abigail replied, "though I understand my presence may be causing some consternation." Daniel shifted uneasily. "Miss Fletcher, I wonder if I might have a word in private." Mrs. Barlow rose, taking the hint. "I'll leave you to it. Sheriff, your usual table's open by the window." Once they were alone, Daniel took the vacated chair, leaning forward to speak in low tones. "I've heard you've taken a position at Mason's." "News travels quickly," Abigail observed. "Yes, beginning tomorrow." "I wish you wouldn't," Daniel said, frustration evident in his voice. "It puts me in an awkward position having you remain in Riverdale." Abigail set down her teacup with deliberate care. "Mr. Patterson, my employment decisions are no longer your concern. I need to earn my living while I determine my next steps." "I've offered to pay your return passage," he reminded her. "And I've declined," she countered. "I didn't travel west to retreat at the first disappointment." Daniel leaned back, studying her with a mix of exasperation and unwilling admiration. "This is precisely the forthrightness your cousin warned about." "My cousin," Abigail said, allowing some of her anger to show, "was threatened by any woman who spoke her mind, particularly one who understood business better than he did. His opinion of me is as biased as it is irrelevant." "Nevertheless," Daniel pressed, "your presence here creates a difficult situation. People are already asking questions." "Let them ask," Abigail replied simply. "I have nothing to hide. Our arrangement didn't suit and was dissolved by mutual agreement. There's no scandal in that." Daniel's expression suggested he found her naive. "Small towns thrive on less, and your conversation with Mercer this afternoon has already fueled speculation." "A chance encounter on the street that lasted less than 2 minutes, Abigail clarified, irritation rising. "Hardly cause for gossip? "You don't understand Riverdale," Daniel insisted. "Mercer keeps to himself for good reason. People here respect him but consider him damaged, unpredictable since the accident. For a single woman newly arrived to be seen conversing with him implies absolutely nothing," Abigail interrupted, her patience fraying. "Mr. Patterson, I appreciate that you feel responsible for my presence here, but I am a grown woman capable of managing my own affairs and choosing my own acquaintances." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I see there's no reasoning with you. I had hoped to spare us both the discomfort of town speculation, but you seem determined to court it." "I'm determined to live my life with dignity and independence," Abigail corrected. "If Riverdale chooses to speculate, that's beyond my control." He rose, disappointment evident. "Then I'll bid you good evening. I hope you reconsider before your situation becomes more difficult." After he departed, Abigail remained at her table, emotions churning beneath her composed exterior. Daniel's concern was partially self-serving. He feared how her presence might reflect on him, but she couldn't dismiss his warning entirely. Small communities operated by their own rules, and she was an outsider disrupting the established order. Yet what choice did she have? Return east to face Walter's smug satisfaction? Retreat to another town where she knew no one at all? No. She would remain in Riverdale for now, establish herself through hard work, and let her actions speak for themselves. The next morning, Abigail arrived at Mason's general store precisely at 8, dressed in a serviceable grey skirt and white shirtwaist, with her hair secured in a practical knot. Martin Mason was already sorting mail behind the counter, the early morning light filtering through the dusty front windows. "Morning, Miss Fletcher," he greeted, glancing up briefly. "Ready to tackle the storeroom?" "Lead the way," Abigail replied, rolling up her sleeves. The back storeroom was worse than she'd anticipated, a chaotic jumble of crates, barrels, and shelf goods with no apparent organization. Invoices and packing slips were stuffed haphazardly in a crate beside an ancient ledger book, with more crossed-out entries than clean ones. "Been meaning to get this sorted for months," Martin admitted, surveying the chaos. "Inventory's next week, and I can't make heads or tails of what's here versus what's on the books." Abigail assessed the situation with a practiced eye. "I'll need to create a proper system. Sort by category first, then reconcile with the ledger." "You really did this kind of work back east?" Martin asked, curiosity evident. "My father believed his daughter should understand business as well as any son," Abigail explained. "After he died, my cousin Walter took over the store, but relied on me to manage inventory and accounts." Martin nodded slowly. "Well, I'll leave you to it. Call if you need anything lifted or moved. Jimmy comes in at 10 to help with deliveries." Left alone, Abigail surveyed the challenge before her. Then, methodically, she began creating order from chaos, sorting merchandise by type, checking quantities against invoices, and noting discrepancies. The work was physical and demanding, but familiar in its rhythms. By noon, she had cleared and organized one full corner of the storeroom, creating a visible path through what had been an impassable mess. When Martin brought her a sandwich and coffee at midday, he stopped in the doorway, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, taking in the transformation. "You've done more in 4 hours than Jimmy managed in a month. Of Saturdays." "Systems create efficiency," Abigail replied simply, wiping dust from her hands before accepting the offered lunch. "But your inventory tracking needs a complete overhaul. You're losing money on spoilage and misplaced stock." Instead of taking offense, Martin chuckled. "Direct indeed. My wife used to say the same before she passed, but I never had the head for it." He gestured to her progress. "What's your plan for the rest?" As Abigail outlined her organizational approach, she became aware of voices from the front of the store, one of them belonging to Noah Mercer. His distinctive rasp carried through the half-open door as he discussed an order of fencing supplies. "Boys not with you today?" Martin asked during a lull in their conversation. "Samuel's helping with the lambing," Noah replied. "Twins born this morning." "Good news that," Martin said. "Oh, nearly forgot your mail. Came in yesterday's post." There was a rustle of paper, then Noah's voice again, sharper. "This is addressed to Patterson. Must have gotten mixed in with yours," Martin said. "I'll set it aside for him." "No need. I'll be passing Pine Creek on my way home." A pause. "Anything else you need to tell me, Martin?" The storekeeper's voice became deliberately casual. "Heard you met our newest arrival yesterday, Philadelphia lady." "Passed her on the street," Noah confirmed, his tone neutral. "Seems Patterson's mail order arrangement didn't work out." "She's in the back now, helping with inventory," Martin continued, a hint of mischief in his voice. "Knows her way around. A ledger book, I'll say that much." There was a weighted silence. Then Noah's voice, lower but still audible. "Leave it be, Martin. The woman's had enough gossip without you adding to it." Abigail felt a surge of unexpected gratitude at this defense. From a virtual stranger. She resumed eating her sandwich, deliberately making enough noise that they would know she could hear them. The conversation promptly shifted to the price of wool and the condition of the North Road after recent rains. A week passed quickly as Abigail established her place at Mason's General Store. What had begun as a 2-day trial transformed into a permanent position as Martin recognized her value. The back storeroom now stood organized with military precision, inventory categorized and accessible, and a new ledger system implemented that even Martin could follow with minimal guidance. "Never seen the place so orderly," Martin marveled on. Friday afternoon, as Abigail completed her first weekly tabulation of sales and expenses. "Emily, my late wife, she'd have approved." "High praise indeed," Abigail replied, knowing how deeply Martin still honored his wife's memory 15 years after her passing. "Though we still need to adjust your pricing on canned goods. You're barely breaking even on beans and peaches," Martin chuckled. "Always business with you, isn't it? Speaking of which," he reached into his vest pocket and produced an envelope. "Your week's wages, as agreed. $3, with the 50-cent bonus for organizing the ledgers." The money represented security, however temporary, and Abigail accepted it with quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Mason." "Martin," he corrected. "If you're staying on, might as well use my given name." A bell jangled as the front door opened, and Martin excused himself to attend to the customer. Abigail remained at the small desk he'd installed for her near the back, recording the day's final transactions. She could hear Martin's voice greeting Sheriff Taylor, their conversation drifting back to her. "Anything from the territorial government?" "About that road funding?" Martin was asking. "Nothing yet," the sheriff replied, "though Mercer's petition has more signatures than I expected. Even Patterson signed after some persuading." "Noah can be convincing when it matters," Martin agreed. "Boy with him today?" "At the wagon. Writing's improving. Showed me a note he'd drafted about those new lambs." There was a pause then. "Heard you hired the Fletcher woman permanent." Abigail's hand stilled over the ledger, her ears instinctively sharpening at the mention of her name. "Best decision I've made in years," Martin replied without hesitation. "Store's running smoother than it has since Emily died. Woman knows her business." "Patterson's still sore about it," the sheriff remarked. "Says it reflects poorly on him having her remain in town," Martin snorted. "Daniel always did worry more about appearances than substance. Miss Fletcher's work speaks for itself." Further conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices outside, angry shouts followed by a child's cry of distress. Martin and the sheriff moved quickly to the door, Abigail rising to follow. The scene on the street revealed the source of the commotion. A boy of about 10 with dark hair was backed against the hitching post outside the store, his face a mask of confusion and fear. Two larger boys stood before him, one holding a slate that appeared to have been snatched from the younger child's hands. Noah Mercer was dismounting from his wagon several yards away, his movements hampered by his stiff leg as he struggled to reach the confrontation. "Samuel," he called, his voice strained. The dark-haired boy didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the older boys who were laughing and holding the slate out of reach. With a jolt, Abigail recalled Mrs. Barlow's words. Noah's son had lost his hearing in the accident. Without conscious thought, Abigail moved past Martin and the sheriff, crossing swiftly to the boys. She plucked the slate from the taller boy's grasp with firm authority. "That's quite enough," she stated, in a voice that carried clearly. "Down the street. 2 against 1, and your opponent unable to hear your taunts. Your mothers would be ashamed." The boys gaped at her, caught between defiance and embarrassment at being so directly confronted by a woman they didn't know. "Just having some fun." "Mom," the taller one muttered. "At someone else's expense," Abigail replied coolly. "That's not fun, it's cruelty." She examined the slate, which contained careful, methodical writing. A list of supplies. "Now, apologize to Samuel and be on your way." "Can't hear us anyway," the second boy grumbled. "He can see your faces," Abigail countered. "Show genuine remorse or I'll speak with your parents directly." The threat was effective. Both boys mumbled apologies with reluctant nods toward Samuel, whose expression remained wary but relieved as Abigail handed him back the slate. By this time, Noah had reached them, his breathing slightly labored from his hurried approach. The look he gave the retreating boys could have stripped paint, but his expression softened as he turned to his son. "You're all right?" he asked, his hands simultaneously forming the words in a simplified sign language. Samuel nodded, his own hands moving in quick response. Noah turned to Abigail, his green eyes intense. "Thank you for intervening, Miss Fletcher." "No thanks necessary," she replied. "Those boys needed reminding of basic decency. Nevertheless, I appreciate it." He hesitated, glancing at his son, who was watching their lips carefully. "Samuel has something to say to you." The boy stepped forward, his movements deliberate. He lifted his slate and wrote quickly, then held it up for Abigail to read. "Thank you for helping me." "You're very welcome, Samuel," she replied, making sure. Her face was visible to him as she spoke clearly. "Your writing is excellent." A shy smile transformed the boy's serious face, revealing a dimple in one cheek that unexpectedly mirrored his father's. "We should continue our errands," Noah said, his usual gruff manner returning. "Samuel, finish the list while I speak with Sheriff Taylor." As Noah limped toward the store, Samuel remained beside Abigail, writing on his slate again. When he held it up, she read, "Do you know signs?" "I'm afraid not," she admitted, watching his face fall slightly. "But I would like to learn if you'd be willing to teach me." This bold statement surprised even herself. Why had she offered such a thing to a child she'd just met? Yet the brightness that returned to Samuel's eyes confirmed she'd said the right thing. He wrote quickly, "Really? Most people don't bother." "I'm not most people," Abigail replied with a small smile. "And I believe communication is important." Samuel studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful beyond his years. Then he carefully formed a gesture with his right hand, fingers spread and thumb touching his forehead, then moving outward. "What does that mean?" Abigail asked. He wrote, "Thank you. Most important sign to know." Abigail mimicked the gesture, watching Samuel's face for confirmation she'd done it correctly. His nod and smile were all the approval she needed. Noah returned from his brief conversation with the sheriff, his expression unreadable as he observed the exchange between his son and Abigail. "Samuel's offering to teach me some signs," Abigail explained, feeling oddly like she'd been caught doing something improper. Noah's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's generous of him." He glanced at his son, who was watching their conversation intently. We need to finish our business in town before dark." Samuel nodded, but quickly wrote on his slate and showed it to his father. Noah read it, hesitated, then turned to Abigail. "My son asks if you might join us for Sunday dinner tomorrow," he translated, his tone careful. "He'd like to teach you more signs." A pause. "But I understand if you have other commitments." The invitation was unexpected, and Abigail sensed Noah was offering her an easy way to decline, yet something about Samuel's earnest expression and Noah's guarded one compelled her to accept. "I'd be delighted," she replied. "What time should I arrive?" Both Mercers looked slightly surprised at her. Ready acceptance. Noah recovered first. "Noon would be suitable. Broken Wheel is about 5 miles north of town. I can arrange transportation." "Mrs. Barlow mentioned the Riverdale livery has horses for hire," Abigail interrupted. "I'm quite comfortable riding." Noah's expression suggested he was reassessing her yet again. "The trail can be rough in places." "I grew up riding through Pennsylvania woodlands," Abigail assured him. "I'm sure I can manage a Montana trail." A hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. "As you wish, Miss Fletcher. We're the first ranch north, just past the split oak at Miller's Creek." As the Mercers departed to finish their errands, Abigail became aware of curious stares from several townspeople who had witnessed the exchange. Sheriff Taylor and Martin were watching from the store porch, their expressions a mix of surprise and speculation. "Interesting development," Martin commented as she rejoined them. "Noah Mercer hasn't invited anyone to Broken Wheel since the accident." "It was Samuel's invitation," Abigail corrected, though she understood the significance. "He wants to teach me sign language." "Smart boy," the sheriff observed. "Takes after his father that way." Noah created that signing system himself after Samuel lost his hearing, adapted it from a book he ordered special from Washington. Abigail recalled the fluid movements between father and son, the efficiency of their communication despite Samuel's disability. It spoke of dedication and intelligence, and a depth of caring that contradicted Noah's gruff exterior. That evening, the hotel dining room buzzed with barely concealed interest as Abigail ate her supper. Word of her intervention with the boys and subsequent invitation to Broken Wheel had spread through Riverdale with predictable speed. Mrs. Barlow slid into the chair opposite her as she finished her meal. "You've caused quite a stir," the hotel keeper observed. "Again." "So it seems," Abigail replied, unperturbed, "though I fail to see how accepting a child's dinner invitation warrants such fascination." "It's not the child that has tongues wagging," Mrs. Barlow pointed out. "It's Noah. Man's kept to himself for 3 years, focusing solely on his son and that struggling ranch. Now, suddenly, he's inviting the woman who rejected Daniel Patterson to Sunday dinner." "I didn't reject Mr. Patterson," Abigail corrected. "The decision was mutual, and the invitation came from Samuel." Mrs. Barlow's shrewd eyes suggested she wasn't convinced. "Perhaps, but Noah could have easily discouraged it. That he didn't speaks volumes." Before Abigail could respond, the cafe door opened and Daniel Patterson entered, his expression darkening when he spotted her. He approached their table with clear reluctance, his posture stiff. "Miss Fletcher, Mrs. Barlow," he greeted formally. "I wonder if I might have a word with Miss Fletcher in private." Mrs. Barlow rose with a knowing look. "I'll leave you to it." Once they were alone, Daniel sat, leaning forward to speak in low tones. "I've heard about the incident with the Mercer boy this afternoon." "News travels at remarkable speed in Riverdale," Abigail observed. "Yes, I helped Samuel Mercer when some boys were taunting him." Daniel frowned. "And now you're visiting Broken Wheel tomorrow." "I accepted a dinner invitation," Abigail corrected. "A simple courtesy." "There's nothing simple about it," Daniel countered, lowering his voice further. "Noah Mercer doesn't welcome visitors. Hasn't for years. Your association with him will only fuel town gossip." Abigail studied Daniel's tense expression. "You seem remarkably concerned with my social standing for someone who ended our arrangement." A flush crept up his neck. "I'm trying to help you, Miss Fletcher. Riverdale doesn't understand a woman like you. Independent, outspoken, associating with Mercer, who's equally unconventional, will only make your position here more difficult." "My position is secure," Abigail replied. "I have employment, lodging, and am free to choose my own acquaintances. Mason may employ you now, but townsfolk are already whispering about your intervention. Today, they're calling it unfeminine to confront those boys so directly." "Would they prefer I had ignored a deaf child being bullied?" Abigail asked, genuine frustration coloring her tone. "They would prefer you behaved with more restraint, allowed men to handle the situation." Daniel sighed. "This is precisely what I meant about your fierce nature being unsuited to Riverdale." Abigail fell silent, contemplating his words. The same quality that had made her unmarriageable to Daniel was apparently making her an object of disapproval to the wider community. Yet Martin valued her work, Mrs. Barlow seemed to respect her independence, and Samuel Mercer had looked at her with gratitude rather than judgment. "Mr. Patterson," she said finally, "I appreciate your concern, misguided though it may be, but I didn't survive losing my parents, rebuilding my life, and traveling west alone, only to shrink myself to meet Riverdale's expectations." "Then you'll continue to face difficulties," Daniel warned, "especially if you pursue this friendship with the Mercers." "A dinner invitation hardly constitutes a friendship," Abigail pointed out. "Though Samuel seems a remarkable child." "The boy is," Daniel agreed, "but Noah is—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Damaged. The accident changed him. He was never particularly sociable, but since losing Rebecca, he's grown bitter, suspicious. People respect his resilience, but find him difficult. Grief affects people differently," Abigail said quietly. "Not everyone wears it visibly." Daniel shook his head. "It's more than grief. There are rumors about that night. Why the wagon was on that dangerous stretch after dark, why Rebecca was driving instead of Noah." Abigail's spine stiffened. "Rumors I have no interest in hearing. Good evening, Mr. Patterson." She rose, signaling the end of their conversation, but Daniel caught her wrist lightly. "Be careful tomorrow," he said, his expression surprisingly earnest. Broken Wheel earned its name in more ways than one. The following morning dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the ride to Broken Wheel Ranch. Abigail dressed in her riding skirt, practical dark wool split for comfort on horseback, but appearing modest when standing, and a fresh shirtwaist. Her hair she secured in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, practical for wearing under a borrowed hat from the livery. The livery owner, a weathered man named Jenkins, eyed her skeptically when she requested a mount. "Heading to Mercer's place, I hear," he remarked, leading her to a stall containing a steady-looking bay mare. "Buttercup here is gentle enough for a lady rider." "I prefer something with a bit more spirit," Abigail replied, noticing a dappled grey gelding watching them alertly from across the aisle. Jenkins followed her gaze and chuckled. "Thunder? Not a chance, miss. He's got a mind of his own." "Perfect," Abigail said with a smile. "We'll understand each other then." 20 minutes. Later, against Jenkins' better judgment, Abigail was mounted on Thunder and heading north out of Riverdale. The grey gelding moved eagerly beneath her, clearly enjoying the open road after days in the livery stable. Abigail matched his energy, sitting deep in the saddle with the confidence of someone who had grown up riding through Pennsylvania woodlands. The trail to Broken Wheel followed a shallow valley before climbing into rolling hills dotted with pines. The landscape opened around her, expansive in a way the east never was, with snow-capped mountains visible in the distance. Spring was emerging in patches of wildflowers and tender green grass, pushing through last year's brown. She spotted the split oak Noah had mentioned, its massive trunk divided into two distinct leaders, marking the turn toward Broken Wheel. The ranch came into view as she crested a gentle rise. A cluster of buildings nestled in a protected hollow, with pastures spreading outward on three sides. Unlike Pine Creek's imposing two-story house, Broken Wheel's main residence was a modest one-story structure with a covered porch stretching across the front. To one side stood a barn, corrals, and what appeared to be a small bunkhouse. On the other, a kitchen garden was newly turned for spring planting. Beyond the immediate buildings, she could see fenced pastures where cattle grazed alongside a smaller flock of sheep. As Abigail approached, Thunder's hooves clattering on the packed earth of the yard, the front door opened. Samuel emerged first, his face lighting with recognition. Noah followed more slowly, surprise evident in his expression as he took in Abigail astride the spirited grey. "You made it," he observed as she reined Thunder to a stop. "On Jenkins' Thunder, no less. He doesn't let many ride that horse." "We came to an understanding," Abigail replied, dismounting smoothly before Noah could offer assistance. "He's a magnificent animal." Samuel approached eagerly, hands moving in a greeting she couldn't interpret, though his smile needed no translation. "He says welcome to Broken Wheel," Noah translated. His usual gruffness softened slightly. "And he's impressed you rode Thunder. Most women choose Buttercup." Abigail smiled directly at Samuel. "Please thank him for the welcome, and tell him I've never been much for choosing the expected path." Noah's eyebrows rose slightly as he signed her response to his son. Samuel's grin widened, and he gestured toward the house with obvious enthusiasm. "He's eager to start your signing lesson," Noah explained, taking Thunder's reins. "I'll see to your mount if you'd like to go inside." The interior of the house was simply furnished, but surprisingly comfortable. The main room combined living and dining areas, with a stone fireplace along one wall and bookshelves along another. Abigail noted the unexpected number of books, not just practical manuals on ranching and veterinary care, but volumes of history, natural science, and literature. Samuel led her to the dining table where he had arranged a slate and several sheets of paper covered with carefully drawn hand positions. "He's been preparing for your visit," Noah explained as he returned from settling Thunder in the barn. "Created those diagrams himself." Abigail examined the drawings, methodical illustrations of hand signs with their meanings written beneath. "These are remarkable, Samuel. You have a real talent for teaching." The boy beamed as Noah translated, then gestured for her to sit. For the next hour, Samuel guided Abigail through basic signs, simple greetings, common objects, and questions. Noah moved between kitchen and table, preparing dinner while occasionally clarifying a sign or offering context. Abigail proved an apt pupil, her hands quickly adapting to the unfamiliar movements. By the time Noah announced dinner was ready, she could form several simple sentences and recognize many of Samuel's responses. "You have a natural aptitude for languages," Noah remarked as he set a platter of roasted chicken on the table. "Samuel doesn't usually make this much progress with new people." "I've always enjoyed learning," Abigail replied, "and Samuel is an excellent teacher." The meal was surprisingly delicious, roasted chicken with herbs, potatoes, and early spring greens. From the kitchen garden, Noah served with quiet efficiency, his movements revealing a man accustomed to handling domestic tasks. "Did you cook before?" Abigail began, then hesitated, unsure how to reference his loss. "Before Rebecca died?" Noah finished for her, his tone matter-of-fact. "No. Necessity proves a thorough teacher." He glanced at Samuel, who was focused on his meal. "We adapted, both of us." There was pride in those simple words. Not self-pity or bitterness, but recognition of survival against difficult odds. Abigail felt an unexpected kinship with this scarred, reserved man who had rebuilt his life around his son's needs, just as she had reconstructed herself after losing her parents. "How did you develop the signing system?" she asked as the meal progressed. "It seems quite comprehensive." Noah's expression softened slightly. "Trial and error at first. Then I found a book on hand languages used by certain native tribes and another on methods developed for deaf students back east. Adapted them to our needs." He glanced at Samuel with unmistakable pride. "He learned quickly, faster than I did. And his reading and writing continues strongly. He lost his hearing but not his intelligence." Noah's jaw tightened slightly. "Though some in town treat him as if he did. Like those boys yesterday," Abigail observed. Noah nodded, his expression darkening. "It happens occasionally. Usually I'm with him, but you can't always protect him," Abigail finished. "No parent can, even from cruelty." Samuel, who had been watching their lips carefully, tapped the table to gain their attention. His hands moved in a question that made Noah's eyebrows rise. "He's asking if you lost your parents," Noah translated, his tone careful. "You don't need to answer." "It's all right," Abigail assured him, turning to Samuel. "Yes, I did. 3 years ago, our house caught fire." She spoke clearly so Samuel could read her lips, watching compassion fill his young face. His hands formed a gesture she recognized from their lesson, the sign for sorry. "Thank you," she replied, forming the sign he'd taught her earlier. Then to Noah, "How does he know about loss so intuitively? Most children his age." "Samuel grew up quickly after Rebecca died," Noah said quietly. "Necessity again." After dinner, Samuel showed Abigail his schoolwork, neat columns of sums, carefully copied passages from books, and drawings that revealed genuine artistic talent. Noah explained their routine, mornings dedicated to ranch work, where Samuel participated fully despite his disability, afternoons to lessons, evenings to reading, and additional signing practice. The schools in Riverdale weren't equipped for a deaf student, Noah explained as Samuel fetched something from his room, "and I refused to send him away to a special institution. He deserves better than to be treated as defective." The fierceness in his tone, protective, determined, struck a chord with Abigail. Here was the quality that had made her unsuitable in Philadelphia society, the same directness and strength of purpose that Daniel Patterson had rejected. Yet in Noah Mercer, it appeared not as a flaw, but as the foundation of his character. Samuel returned with a wooden box that he set before Abigail with evident pride. Inside, nested in fabric, lay an intricately carved chess set, each piece detailed with remarkable precision. "Did you make these?" she asked, lifting a knight whose mane flowed in textured waves. Samuel nodded, his eyes bright with pleasure at her admiration. "They're extraordinary," she told him sincerely. "True craftsmanship." "He learned from books," Noah explained. "Has a natural gift for seeing how things should be shaped." A hint of a smile softened his scarred face. "Carving gives him a way to create beauty from broken things." The phrase struck Abigail powerfully. Wasn't that what she herself had been? Attempting since the fire, creating beauty, or at least purpose, from the broken remnants of her former life. As the afternoon light began to fade, Abigail reluctantly acknowledged she should return to town before dark. Samuel's disappointment was evident, but brightened when Noah suggested she might visit again the following Sunday. "If Miss Fletcher wishes," he added, his tone carefully neutral. "I would enjoy that," Abigail replied without hesitation. "I have much more to learn about signing." Noah himself saddled Thunder and helped adjust the stirrups for her return journey. As he handed her the reins, their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through Abigail's hand. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "It meant a great deal to Samuel. And to you." The question escaped before she could reconsider its boldness. Noah studied her for a long moment, his green eyes unreadable. "Yes," he finally admitted. "Though I hadn't expected it to." Over the following weeks, Abigail's life in Riverdale settled into a rhythm unlike anything she had experienced in Philadelphia. Weekdays were dedicated to her work at Mason's, where her organizational systems had transformed the once chaotic store into a model of efficiency. Martin had increased her wages to $4 weekly, a respectable sum that allowed her to maintain her room at the hotel and even set aside a small amount for future security. Sundays became the highlight of her week. Mornings attending Riverdale's small church service, followed by afternoons at Broken Wheel Ranch, learning sign language with Samuel, and increasingly engaging in surprisingly deep conversations with Noah. Their initial reserve had gradually given way to a comfortable familiarity. Noah, she discovered, possessed a keen intelligence and unexpected breadth of knowledge gleaned from his extensive reading. Behind his gruff exterior lay a thoughtful mind that considered questions of justice, natural science, and philosophy, with the same careful attention he gave to his ranching operations. "Most people in Riverdale would be shocked to hear you quoting Emerson," Abigail remarked one Sunday, as they sat on the porch watching Samuel sketch a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. "Most people in Riverdale see what they expect to see," Noah replied, with the hint of a smile that was becoming more frequent in her presence. "A scarred rancher with a limp and a deaf son, hardly the image of philosophical discourse." "People rarely look beyond surfaces," Abigail agreed. "In Philadelphia, I was judged solely as an unmarried woman approaching 30, clearly failing at her primary purpose of securing a husband." "Their loss," Noah observed quietly. "Though I understand society's need for simple categories, makes the world less complicated if everyone stays in their assigned places. And if they don't," his green eyes met hers directly, "then they face resistance, like you have since arriving in Riverdale." "And you, since the accident," she added softly. Noah nodded, his gaze shifting to Samuel. "People prefer their tragedies, tidily resolved. The grieving widower who either remarries quickly or embraces stoic solitude forever. The disabled child who is either inspirationally triumphant or quietly institutionalized. We didn't follow either script." "Nor should you have," Abigail said firmly. The connection growing between them remained unspoken, but increasingly evident. In town, however, Abigail's regular visits to Broken Wheel fueled steady speculation. Some viewed her association with the Mercers charitably, a kind woman helping a motherless boy. Others ascribed less innocent motives to her friendship with Noah. Daniel Patterson had ceased his direct attempts to discourage her after their confrontation in the hotel cafe, but his disapproval remained evident in cold greetings when they passed on Riverdale's main street. More concerning were the sidelong glances from certain townswomen, particularly Mrs. Sullivan, the banker's wife, who had apparently harbored hopes of securing Noah as a husband for her widowed sister. "Sullivan's asking questions about your background," Martin warned Abigail one afternoon as they reviewed the monthly accounts, "hinting there must be some scandal that drove you west." "There was no scandal," Abigail replied calmly, "unless you count a woman choosing independence over convention." Martin chuckled. "That's scandal enough for some. Just thought you should." "No, Sullivan has influence with the church ladies." Abigail appreciated the warning, but refused to alter her behavior to appease town gossips. If anything, the opposition strengthened her resolve to maintain her friendship with the Mercers, particularly as she witnessed Samuel's blossoming confidence. The boy who had cowered against a hitching post was now proudly showing her his latest carvings and sketches, his communications becoming more complex as she grew fluent in their signing system. On the fourth Sunday of her visits, Noah surprised her by suggesting they take dinner outdoors. a picnic by the small creek that gave the ranch part of its water supply. Samuel raced ahead with a basket while Noah and Abigail followed more slowly, his limp more pronounced after a morning spent mending fences. "You're in pain today," Abigail observed, noting his tightened jaw. "Weather's changing," he replied with a dismissive gesture. "Always affects the leg. Yet you suggested a walk to the creek." Noah glanced at her, a wry smile touching his lips. "Samuel's been planning this picnic all week. Drew a map of the perfect spot. I wouldn't disappoint him. For mere discomfort." The simple statement revealed volumes about his character, the same fierce devotion to his son's happiness that had driven him to create a signing system, to adapt ranch operations to accommodate a deaf child, to forge ahead despite loss and pain. The creek location proved worth the journey, a grassy bank shaded by cottonwoods, with clear water bubbling over smooth stones. Samuel had spread a blanket and was arranging food from the basket with careful precision: cold chicken, biscuits, early strawberries, and a jar of lemonade. As they ate, Abigail found herself studying Noah when he wasn't watching. The way sunlight filtered through the trees highlighted both his strength and vulnerability. The scar that ran from temple to jaw had initially seemed his defining feature, but she now barely noticed it compared to the expressiveness of his green eyes or the rare smile that transformed his serious face. After they ate, Samuel wandered downstream to sketch water patterns, leaving Abigail and Noah alone on the blanket. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken eventually by Noah's quiet voice. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For seeing us. Truly seeing." His gaze remained on the distant figure of his son. "Most people look at Samuel and see only what he lacks. They look at me and see damage. You've never done either." Abigail considered her response carefully, perhaps because I recognize the feeling. Being seen as incomplete or flawed rather than simply different. Noah turned to face her, his expression unusually open. "Abigail, I've been meaning to ask something that may seem forward." Her heart quickened unexpectedly. "Yes? Your arrangement with Patterson, was it truly mutual when it ended? Or did his letter from your cousin simply provide a convenient excuse?" The directness of the question startled her. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've come to know you these past weeks," Noah replied. "Your strength, your intelligence, your kindness. With Samuel, and I cannot reconcile those qualities with a man rejecting you for being too fierce unless he fundamentally misunderstood what makes a true partnership." Abigail looked away, gathering her thoughts. "Daniel wanted a wife who would enhance his standing in the community. Someone decorative and biddable. When my cousin's letter arrived warning about my forceful nature, it confirmed fears Daniel already harbored after our correspondence. And you, did you truly want marriage to such a man?" "I wanted security," Abigail admitted, "a place to belong after losing my parents and our home. My prospects in Philadelphia were limited by my age and circumstances." She met his gaze directly. "But no. From our first meeting, I knew Daniel Patterson was not a man who would value me as I am. So yes, the decision was mutual, though perhaps for different reasons." Noah nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty." "And now may I ask you something equally direct?" Abigail ventured. "Fair exchange," he agreed, a hint of wariness returning to his expression. "Why have you remained so isolated since the accident? From what I've gathered, you were respected in Riverdale even before the tragedy, yet you've kept almost everyone at a distance these 3 years. Pain flickered across Noah's features, quickly masked. "The simple answer is that Samuel needed stability, not social connections, the deeper truth." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "After Rebecca died, Riverdale was kind but smothering. Endless casseroles delivered with pitying glances. Offers to take Samuel off my And for a few hours, suggestions from well-meaning women about how a household needs a feminine touch. They meant well, Abigail offered. Perhaps, but beneath the sympathy was judgment. Whispers about why the wagon was on that road after dark. Why Rebecca was driving instead of me. His jaw tightened. Few said it directly, but the implication was clear. I had somehow failed to protect them. Is that why you withdrew, because of gossip? Noah shook his head. I withdrew because Samuel and I needed to heal in our own way, not according to Riverdale's expectations of proper grieving, and because, his voice roughened slightly, because every pitying glance reminded me of what I'd lost and what I couldn't change. And now, Abigail asked softly, why have you allowed me into that carefully guarded space? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had directly addressed until this moment. Noah's gaze held hers steadily, all pretense of casual conversation abandoned. Because you never looked at us with pity, he said finally. From that first day when you confronted those boys, you've treated Samuel as capable rather than damaged, and you've seen me as a man, not a tragedy. He hesitated, then added with quiet intensity, and because for the first time in 3 years, I found myself thinking about more than just survival. The admission, so honest it bordered on vulnerability, created a moment of perfect understanding between them. Abigail recognized the courage it had taken for this private, guarded man to speak so openly. Noah, she began, but was interrupted by Samuel's running return, slate in hand, eager to show them both his sketches of the creek. The moment passed, but something fundamental had shifted between them. As they packed up the picnic and walked back to the ranch house, their conversation returned to practical matters, but an unspoken awareness lingered. Recognition of possibilities neither had anticipated when Abigail first arrived in Riverdale. As Noah helped her mount Thunder for her return to town, their hands touched briefly. This time, neither pulled away immediately. Same time next Sunday, he asked, his tone casual, though his eyes conveyed deeper meaning. I'll be here, Abigail promised. She rode away with a strange lightness in her heart, barely noticing the gathering. Clouds that promised the spring storm Noah's aching leg had predicted. So absorbed was she in thoughts of their conversation that she failed to observe the rider watching from a distant ridge. Daniel Patterson, his expression darkening as he observed her departure from Broken Wheel Ranch. The storm Abigail had barely noticed during her ride back to town broke with unexpected fury that night. Rain lashed against the hotel windows as thunder rolled across the valley, a spring deluge that turned Riverdale's dirt streets to rivers of mud by morning. Abigail splashed her way to Mason's through puddles that reached her ankles in places. Grateful for the practical boots she'd brought from Philadelphia, the store was unusually busy. Ranchers and townspeople alike stocking up on supplies, anticipating several days of difficult travel if the rain continued. Going to be a wet week, Martin commented as they worked together to fill orders. Creeks already rising at the north end of town. By mid-morning, Sheriff Taylor arrived with news that had the customers murmuring anxiously. Miller's Creek Bridge is underwater, he announced to the gathered crowd. And the north road's washed out in 2 places. Anyone living that direction is cut off for at least a few days. Abigail's hands stilled on the flour she'd been measuring. Broken Wheel is north of the creek, isn't it? First ranch past it, the sheriff confirmed. Mercer and the boy are likely stranded until the water recedes. A knot of worry formed in Abigail's stomach. The Mercers were capable, certainly, but Noah's leg troubled him in damp weather, and ranching chores wouldn't wait for the storm to pass. She recalled his mention of early lambing, vulnerable newborns that would need protection from the harsh elements. When the sheriff departed, Abigail approached Martin. Is there another route to the northern ranches, one that doesn't cross Miller's Creek? Martin's eyebrows rose. Thinking of Noah and Samuel, are you? When she nodded, he continued, There's an old logging trail that follows the ridge line. It's 4 miles but stays above the floodplain. It's rough going, though, especially in this weather. Could Thunder manage it? That gray's sure-footed enough, Martin allowed, but it's no ride for a... He stopped, reconsidering his words. As he studied Abigail's determined expression, it's not a journey to undertake lightly. I've ridden in worse conditions, Abigail assured him, and I'm concerned about them managing the ranch alone in this weather, especially with Noah's leg troubling him. Martin's weathered face softened with understanding. You care for them, both of them. I do, Abigail admitted, seeing no reason to deny what had become increasingly clear to herself. Then you'll go regardless of my warnings, Martin sighed. At least take some supplies. I'll make up a package of essentials. By early afternoon, Abigail had secured Thunder from a reluctant Jenkins. Lady, this ain't no day for social calls. Loaded saddlebags with Martin's provisions and donned the oilskin slicker he'd insisted she borrow. The rain had slackened somewhat, but dark clouds promised more to come as she guided Thunder away from town on the less traveled eastern trail that would eventually loop north above Miller's Creek. The journey proved every bit as challenging as Martin had warned. The logging trail was poorly maintained, rutted in places and overgrown in others. Twice, Abigail had to dismount and lead Thunder around washouts where recent rain had carved gullies across the path. Her riding skirt was soon soaked despite the slicker, and mud spattered her boots past the ankles. Yet there was exhilaration in the journey too, a sense of purpose and capability as she navigated obstacles that would have terrified her Philadelphia self. The woman who had boarded that westbound train would never have imagined herself riding alone through Montana wilderness during a storm to reach a ranch where no marriage proposal awaited, only genuine concern for people who had unexpectedly come to matter deeply. The rain returned with renewed intensity as Abigail finally crested the ridge overlooking Broken Wheel. From this elevated vantage, she could see Miller's Creek transformed into a churning brown torrent that had indeed overcome its banks near the bridge. The ranch building stood on slightly higher ground, but water pooled in the lower pastures, and a section of fence had collapsed where the creek edge had eroded. As she guided Thunder down the slope toward the ranch, a figure emerged from the barn. Noah, burdened with what appeared to be hay bales despite the weather and his compromised leg. She watched him pause, sensing rather than hearing Thunder's approach, then straighten abruptly when he recognized the rider. By the time she reached the yard, Noah was waiting, disbelief evident on his face as she dismounted. Abigail, what in God's name are you doing here? He demanded, limping forward to take Thunder's reins. The bridge is out. I came by the logging trail, she explained, removing her sodden hat. Martin told me about the washout. I was concerned about you and Samuel managing alone. Noah stared at her, rain streaming down his face, his expression shifting from shock to something more complex. You rode the ridge trail? In this weather? It wasn't so terrible, Abigail replied, though her aching muscles disagreed. Where's Samuel? In the lambing shed. Noah gestured toward a small structure beyond the barn. We've had 3 births since yesterday. One mother rejected her lamb, so he's bottle feeding it. Without further discussion, Noah led Thunder toward the barn's shelter, and Abigail followed, becoming aware of her drenched state only when they entered the relative dryness. She removed the slicker, grimacing at the mud that caked her skirt. And boots, you're soaked through, Noah observed, his voice gentler now that the initial shock had passed. And half frozen by the look of it, only then did Abigail realize she was trembling, the chill having settled deep during the long ride. Noah muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse or a prayer, then shrugged out of his own jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders despite her protest. No arguments, he said firmly. Let me stable Thunder, then we'll get you to the house and into dry clothes. "I brought supplies," Abigail managed through chattering teeth, indicating the saddlebags. "Martin thought you might need essentials." "With the road cut off." Noah's expression softened further. "That was thoughtful, but not worth risking your safety." As he tended to thunder with efficient movements, Abigail hugged his jacket closer, surrounded by his scent, leather, pine, and something distinctly Noah. The trembling gradually subsided, replaced by a different kind of warmth that had nothing to do with physical temperature. Samuel's reaction to her unexpected arrival was pure joy. He burst from the lambing shed, deaf to the storm, but instantly alert to her presence in the barn doorway. His hands flew in excited signs, too rapid for Abigail to follow completely, though she caught references to the new lambs and his surprise at seeing her. "He wants to know how you crossed the creek," Noah translated the part she missed. "And why you came in the storm. Tell him friends help each other when needed," Abigail replied, signing the words she knew while speaking for those she didn't yet have signs for. Samuel's response was to throw his arms around her in an impulsive hug. That caught her by surprise. Over his head, her eyes met Noah's, finding in them a depth of emotion that stole her breath more effectively than the cold. The house welcomed them with blessed warmth from the stove Noah had kept burning against the chill. While Samuel excitedly showed Abigail the orphaned lamb he'd brought inside, a tiny creature nestled in a box near the fire, Noah disappeared briefly into what she presumed was his bedroom, returning with clothing. "Rebecca's," he explained simply, offering a bundle of fabric. "They should fit well enough. You need to get dry before you catch your death." In the privacy of the small bedroom, Abigail changed from her sodden garments into the borrowed clothing. A simple skirt of sturdy brown wool and a soft flannel shirtwaist. They fit reasonably well, though Rebecca had been slightly shorter, leaving Abigail's ankles visible beneath the skirt hem. Strange intimacy, wearing a dead woman's clothes, she thought, as she braided her damp hair. Yet there was no discomfort. In it, only practical necessity and Noah's thoughtfulness in offering the only available solution. When she emerged, Noah had prepared hot coffee and was heating soup on the stove, while Samuel continued bottle-feeding the lamb. The domesticity of the scene struck Abigail powerfully. This small family carrying on despite adversity, creating warmth and care in the midst of storm and isolation. "The bridge will be impassable for at least 3 days, possibly longer, if the rain continues," Noah informed her, as he placed a steaming mug in her hands. "You're welcome to stay, of course, but—" He hesitated, glancing at Samuel, who was watching their lips. "Riverdale will talk." "Riverdale already talks," Abigail replied with a small smile. "And I didn't ride all this way to turn around because of potential gossip." Noah studied her face, searching for doubt or reservation and finding none. "You truly don't care what they'll say. An unmarried woman staying unchaperoned at a widower's ranch." "I care about you and Samuel managing alone when you're all ready. In pain from the weather," Abigail countered. "I care about those newborn lambs and your damaged fence line. The rest is irrelevant." A smile, one of his rare transformative ones, crossed Noah's face. "There it is," he said softly. "What? That fierce heart Daniel Patterson found so unsuitable?" He shook his head slightly, wonder in his expression. "The man was a fool." The words warmed Abigail more thoroughly than the coffee or dry clothes. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt truly seen, not as a failed mail-order bride or an oddity of independence, but as herself, valued precisely for the qualities others had deemed flaws. "Well," she said practically, setting down her mug, "since I'm here, put me to work. I didn't come to sit by the fire while you struggle with chores." Noah's smile deepened. "Never thought you did." He glanced at the window, where rain still pounded relentlessly. "Let's start with feeding inside, and move to the barn once the worst passes. Samuel can show you how he's caring for the orphaned lamb." As evening approached and the storm showed no signs of abating, the three settled into an unexpected harmony, sharing tasks, communicating through a blend of speech and signing, and finding comfort in companionship against the wild elements outside. When Samuel finally fell asleep on the small sofa, exhausted from the long day's work, Noah carefully covered him with a quilt. "He's happier today than I've seen him in months," Noah observed quietly, watching his son's peaceful face. "Despite the storm and extra work, because of you," Abigail replied. "Your steadiness gives him security, even in difficult circumstances." Noah's gaze shifted to her, green eyes reflecting firelight. "He's equally affected by your presence. We both are." The simple honesty of the statement hung between them, opening a door to conversations they'd circled but never directly entered. The storm lasted 3 days, cutting off Broken Wheel Ranch from town. In that isolated sanctuary, Noah and Abigail's connection deepened as they worked side by side, tending livestock, repairing storm damage, and caring for newborn lambs. Abigail proved herself capable with every task, her practical nature and unflinching resilience revealing themselves fully. "Most women from your background would consider this a nightmare," Noah observed on the third evening as they sat by the fire after Samuel had gone to bed. "My background included surviving alone in a hunting cabin during winter after my parents died," Abigail replied. "This is practically luxury by comparison." Noah's expression grew serious. "The disturbing fierceness your cousin mentioned too. Patterson, Walter believed a properly bred woman should have waited helplessly to be rescued," Abigail confirmed. "My determination to survive was somehow unwomanly in his eyes." "In mine, it's admirable," Noah said quietly. "The same strength that brought you across the ridge trail during a storm, the same strength that allowed you to see past my scars to the man beneath." As firelight cast shadows across the room, Noah finally shared the burden he'd carried alone. "Rebecca and I argued the day of the accident. She wanted to send Samuel to a special school in Denver. I refused. She left angry, taking the wagon to cool off at her sister's. By the time I followed, it was too late." "It wasn't your fault," Abigail said gently. "My head knows that, but Riverdale's implication is clear. If I hadn't argued with her, if I'd been driving instead, my wife would still be alive. And you've carried that burden alone all this time." "Until you," he answered, reaching for her hand. "You who understand loss without requiring perfect grieving. You who see Samuel as gifted rather than damaged. You who look at my scarred face and limping gait and somehow find something worthy beneath." The honesty between them was more intimate than any physical touch. Two souls recognizing in each other the same resilience, the same capacity for both pain and renewal. "I never expected to find someone who would value the very qualities others found unsuitable," Abigail admitted. "And I never expected to want more than survival after Rebecca died," Noah replied, "until a fierce-hearted woman arrived in Riverdale and reminded me that life offers second chances to those brave enough to take them." On the fourth morning, the sun emerged. By midday, Sheriff Taylor arrived on horseback, followed shortly by Daniel Patterson himself, his expression darkening at the sight of Abigail in borrowed clothes, obviously comfortable on Noah's porch, with Samuel signing happily beside her. "So it's true," Daniel said without preamble. "You've been here throughout the storm, alone and unchaperoned. You've ruined your reputation, what little remained of it, and his in the process." Abigail straightened, unshaken by his accusations. "Mr. Patterson, your concern comes 3 months too late. You rejected me for being too fierce for your comfortable life. You forfeited any right to opinions about my choices when you broke our arrangement. I was protecting my standing in the community, and I'm building a life based on truth rather than appearances," Abigail countered. "These past days have shown me exactly what I value: Honest work, genuine connection, and people who appreciate strength rather than fearing it. Noah stepped forward. Patterson, I suggest you return to town. The sheriff can escort Miss Fletcher if she wishes to go. If she wishes, Daniel repeated incredulously. I do need to return temporarily, Abigail said calmly. I have obligations to Martin at the store and personal matters to arrange, but my future plans may have changed somewhat. Before departing, Samuel approached with his slate. Will you come back? Yes, she promised, signing while speaking. Very soon. Noah waited on the porch. This isn't goodbye, Abigail said softly. No, he agreed, his green eyes holding hers with unmistakable meaning. It's merely an intermission. We have much to discuss when you return. 6 weeks later, Riverdale gathered for its annual Founders' Day celebration, coinciding with the completion of the new bridge over Miller's Creek. Built stronger than its predecessor thanks to Noah's petition, Martin Mason called for the community's attention during the evening dance. Friends and neighbors, as most of you know, I'm stepping back from daily store operations. Miss Abigail Fletcher has proven herself not just a skilled bookkeeper, but a visionary who's already expanded our offerings. The store flourishes under her guidance. Applause followed as Abigail acknowledged the recognition with a gracious nod. I'm also pleased to announce another partnership being formalized tonight, Martin continued, eyes twinkling as he gestured toward Noah. Mr. Mercer, I believe you have something to share. Noah stepped forward, Samuel at his side and Abigail joining them. 3 years ago, I believed my life's purpose had narrowed to raising my son and maintaining our ranch. Broken Wheel's name seemed fitting for more than just a damaged wagon. He glanced at Abigail, his expression softening. Then Riverdale received a visitor who understood that broken doesn't mean worthless, merely reshaped by experience. Tonight, with your witness, I'm honored to announce that Miss Abigail Fletcher has agreed to become my wife. Not because either of us needed rescuing, but because together we've discovered something stronger than either could build alone. Samuel stepped forward, hands signing excitedly as Noah translated, My son says she makes our family complete. She teaches me words with her hands and teaches him courage with her heart. The hall erupted in applause, genuine celebration from a community that had come to respect the unusual couple despite initial reservations. Even Daniel Patterson, standing with his recently arrived mail-order bride from St. Louis, a demure young woman who spoke softly and never contradicted him, offered a civil nod. Later, as they danced, Noah murmured, Any regrets about not returning east? None, Abigail replied. Philadelphia held my past, but Riverdale and Broken Wheel hold my future. A future built by your fierce heart, Noah observed, love unmistakable in his eyes. The very quality Patterson rejected. His loss, Abigail said simply. Your gain. Sometimes the things others find too intense, too direct, too fierce, they're exactly what builds something that lasts through storms. Abigail's smile held all the certainty of a woman who had traveled thousands of miles, weathered rejection and gossip, and ultimately found home not in a place, but in people who valued her precisely as she was, fierce heart and all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.